Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Lurkin from Mobalytics, and we're coming at you with an X-Fails Blizzard build with Frozen Orb and Firebolt enchant. So, X-Fails is really good with Blizzard. It's probably even better than Blue Rose, but I do like Blue Rose on the other variant. That was Frozen Orb and Ice Shard enchant, because Ice Shard enchant procs it a ton on frozen enemies because it has such good lucky hit. But this build is going to utilize Firebolt enchant to apply burn for Devouring Blaze, and Firebolt enchant also is a damage over time that has lucky hit, so that will proc off for our X-Fails. So we get in procs from our Firebolt enchant and from our Blizzard. Next we have Frozen Orb. Frozen Orb at base, Frozen Orb enchant at base without the Frozen Orbit aspect. It's an okay way to apply Vuln. You really want the Frozen Orbit aspect if you're using it as your sole way to apply vulnerability. But we don't need that in this build. We don't have the space for it, and we have other ways. But Frozen Orbs are a really good way to freeze enemies faster, and one, freeze enemies faster, and two, it's the main applicator way of applying Firebolt enchant, because Blizzard and Ice Spikes can apply it. Typical old Blizzard builds used to just utilize Raiment teleports to apply burn, because that's the only way to do it. So that's why so many of these builds are running Frozen Orb. Just such a good Firebolt. It goes out, anything that it touches starts burning. It's just very amazing. So let's go into our Seneschal Construct first. This build doesn't really need Evernight. You can slot it if you want, but the main thing here is you want Tempest because it fires the fastest, and then you want Resource because it's so good, especially when you're running X-Fails, because you lose the mana cost roll of Blue Rose. The Resource really helps out. And in addition, this is an Ancient Flame build. One thing I forgot to talk about. We'll get into that very soon. And then I just rounded out with Arcing and Breaking, just to ensure that the Vuln gets applied. You could also run Efficiency and Arcing, or you can even Breaking or Arcing, Breaking or Efficiency here, and then Safeguard if you want to be tankier. But Resource is the main one. It's pretty flexible. And then this is definitely the setup you want on Flash of Adrenaline. Tactical Duration. Reduces the cooldown from 20 to 12 seconds, increases the duration from 8 to 12. It's always up. We take Genesis, because at base we get 20% damage, but then with Genesis we get 50% damage. And if you don't have Genesis, just run Initiative so that he teleports to you. So let's go over the gear. So this is an Asus Ferocity Ancient Flame build. It's really good for X-Files because you're able to stack up the Blizzards. More Blizzards means more dot chances, means more X-File procs. So you end up getting a ton, and instead of like freezing enemies and letting Ice Shard enchant finish them off, you freeze them or you just cast a bunch of Blizzards on them, and then you just keep moving, and then the X-File procs go off and kill everything because that is an AoE. So I use Shako on this build. It's just too good to not. The 4 ranks to all skills doesn't really benefit Blizzard because Blizzard deals like no damage. 57% damage over 57,000 damage over 8 seconds. That's terrible. That's so bad. But then with the Glacial, we get the Ice Spikes. That's where the damage really comes in. So Evernight and Shako don't do that much for this build, but I take it for the resource gen, cooldown, so much max life, and the good all stats. 20% flat DR, you can't really beat it. So if you don't have Shako, you're going to want like a Snow Guards helmet with total armor, max life, and cooldown reduction. The Snow Guards is so good, 25% DR. And then the life on kill roll, you can take max mana, you can take Intelligence, Lucky Hit Chance with Barrier, or I like Life on Kill. Next we have Triple DR, Total Armor Disobedience chest. We don't really need Raiment in this build. The clumping doesn't really do much for us, and because we're using Tibaults, I don't like to run both a unique chest and pant. I want either a DR pant or a DR chest, or else I just feel too squishy. I don't really need the poles. This is an area of an effect build. We got X-Veil procs going off. I don't need to stun and group anything. I can just nuke them this way. So you're going to want, ideally you would have total armor, DR burning, DR distant. The reason that we skip DR close on the chest is because we have a DR close roll down here on Tibaults. I kind of like to spread everything out, keep everything a little even, but any 3 DRs is fine. Next, you're going to want some Ancient Flame Gloves. While both bonuses from the Asus Ferocity passive are active, you get 50% attack speed. You just have to kill an enemy with a crit or hit a boss, and you get this for 3 seconds, and it happens all the time. It's got really good uptime. The main things here are critical strike chance and attack speed, and then it's basically like a pick 2 system out of lucky hit chance, lucky hit restore, and intelligence. I'm not sure which combo of those are best, so just you should be okay. Because of the Seneschal Pet and resource support, like lucky hit restore isn't that big of a deal, and then Blizzard has like bad lucky hit chance, so like getting a lucky hit chance roll on here isn't the end of the world if you don't get it, because it's just we're really getting the Xfel procs from like the sheer number of blizzards that we proc. But so yeah, either lucky hit restore, or intelligence for the second 2 rolls. Not too big of a deal. Tibault is mandatory on all blizzard builds, basically, because of the 40% damage from our teleport when we flame shield, when we deep freeze, and then you can get some really good rotations going with teleport, flame shield, and deep freeze into keeping uptime of your mana and your Tibault's 40% damage. It's actually pretty insane, and that's why I haven't taken deep freeze off the build, and I like the end node that resets all my cooldowns. It makes for some really easy and nice rotations. Next, we take Asus Heirloom Boots, because we can't run Elementalist on this build. It wouldn't give us any more crit chance for the ice spikes, so the only way we can get crit chance is through the Asus Heirloom Boots. This will give you around, oh well, I do have move speed on animate. This will give you around 38-40% crit, and then around 50 after you kill an elite if you have good rolls on your movement speed. Yeah, like 50 after an elite kill during an Asu evade, because it factors in the overcap above the 200% cap that your character's at. So next, wand or a dagger doesn't really make too big of a difference. I just happen to have a wand. Dagger is going to be 3% more damage. Wand's going to be more Xfel proc. So yeah, I'd probably lean towards a wand with this. So you're going to want int all stats, and then pick 2 of critical strike damage, damage to close, and vulnerable damage. I'm tempted to say just critical strike damage and vulnerable damage like we used to stack it, mainly because when the Xfel procs go off, you're not always going to be close to enemies. So you could get more value, especially if you're running arcing and breaking on the pet. Could get more value out of vulnerable, because enemies will be vulnerable when the Xfel procs go off, and then you'll get that little bit of damage. Not too big of a deal. But on here we take Frozen Tundra, so that our ice spikes have a 50% increased explosion radius, and this actually turns Glacial Freeze into quite the little offensive weapon. You can cast a few blizzards on a pack, and you can teleport in, Frost Nova them, and then use your deep freeze. And like if you do that to like a group of like a suppressor pack, they get folded. It's actually pretty crazy how much damage deep freeze does. It's an offensive ult now. It's pretty crazy. Next, we just have a Conceited Focus. You could put Conceited or Storm Swell. I just take Conceited because in theory it has more uptime for just 5% less damage than Storm Swell. You're going to want crit chance, resource gen, cooldown reduction. And then you can either take mana cost or you can take lucky hit restore. Not too big of a deal. Next, we have Xfel's Ring, so that we can get all the Xfel procs from our damage over time, which is Firebolt and Blizzard. I think if you get Starless Skies, I think Xfel's goes. I think just the 40% damage from Starless and then the resource cost reduction just outweighs. Like Xfel's is really good, don't get me wrong, but I think you're going to get way more damage out of all your ice spikes doing 40% more damage. So replace Xfel's with Starless if you get it. I definitely keep Tel Rasha. It's just too good. Non-physical damage, resource generation, cooldown reduction. Then you're going to get 45% damage from this. And it's 60% if you choose to, say, run in Duriel's here over Shako. You're going to get 60% damage, so it's actually pretty crazy. I wouldn't run like Xfel Starless. You can try it if you really want, but I would keep Tel Rasha and then either Xfels or Starless. Next we have a Glacial Necklace. Best way to get these are hard to come by. Well, both of them, the aspect and the necklaces. So ideally, you're going to want movement speed, mana cost reduction, and cooldown reduction. And then you're either going to want 3 ranks of the Icy Touch passive, or preferably 3 ranks of Devouring Blaze. It doesn't make too big of a difference which one you have. I think because we have Firebolt and Enchant, I would definitely want Devouring Blaze. But those amulets are really expensive, and they're so hard to find. So I'll go over the other options too for the passives. So ideally you want Devouring Blaze, that's the best for Firebolt builds. The next best option is Icy Touch. And then after that, it's a bit of a toss-up between Permafrost and Hoarfrost. Hoarfrost is really good. It's actually the best option, one of the best options for mobbing, like because you can chill them. But because you can't chill a boss, it's useless until the stagger part of the boss. But then Permafrost, it's just 15% increased damage to elites. I mean, that's going to be really good for elites and for bossing, but you know, it's not going to work for just regular mobs. So that's why Icy Touch and Devouring Blaze take the #1 slot. So let's move on to, we'll keep Shako off so I can show you the skills. Let's move on to the skill tree, and then we'll do the Paragon Board. So first off, you take 2 points in Firebolt for the enchantment and to progress. We just put 1 point in Frozen Orb. Enhanced Frozen Orb. This doesn't really do anything for us. We're after the Greater Frozen Orb, so that we can apply Vulnerable. 30% chance, and then it always makes frozen enemies vulnerable. 1 point in Devastation just to progress. We don't need any potent warding in this build. My resistances are maxed through the Paragon, as I always do, because I'd rather spend 4 extra points to max my resistances than spend 3 out of my 58 skill points. So that's where I'm at with potent warding. Next, we take 3 points in Flame Shield. I like Enhanced to get more movement speed for more crit, and I like Shimmering to shake off that poison damage. Next, we take 4 ranks in Teleport, Enhanced so that it reduces the cooldown when we land on stuff, and then Shimmering for 30% DR. 3 ranks Glass Cannon for 18% damage. 1 rank Elemental Attunement for a chance to reset one of our defensive cooldown skills. Well, one of our defensive cooldown skills. Then we take 4 ranks in Frost Nova. And even without Shako, we're looking pretty good at 11.49. Then if you slot in Shako, we go from 11.49 to 9.61, so not too big of a difference. That's why ranks do matter. Just something to think about. So you do have pretty good uptime on Frost Nova. We take Enhanced Frost Nova, so when we kill stuff, it reduces the time. Then we take Mystical Frost Nova to make stuff vulnerable. This is a bit of a flex. So you can either pick Ice Armor, you can even just do 1 point Ice Armor, or you could do up to Mystical. But say you wanted to run Ice Armor, you could do something like this, and then max these out. But I'm running Lightning Spear because it's the new Hotness. It's a good way to apply Vul, and it also works with our Elementalist Glyph to get more damage out of enemies that the Lightning Spear hits, so that we're not just relying on Teleport for lightning damage for Elementalist Glyph. So every time it crits somebody, it makes them vulnerable for 3 seconds. It stuns them as well, and then it's got an escalating chance to stun. So towards the end of the Lightning Spear, it's always critting. 1 point in Align of Elements to stack up that Elite DR. 3 ranks Mana Shield, 21% DR. We're spending a ton of mana, so we're always going to have that up. 3 ranks Protection for cooldown. For a barrier when we use a cooldown. Take the bare minimum Blizzard. Its damage is so bad. Just 1 point in Blizzard. This is whatever. You're just using it to progress to mages, because then it takes it from 8 to 12 seconds. Then we path to Devouring Blaze for 21% increased crit strike damage against burning enemies. We don't have any Immobilize in the build, so that's not going to happen, but you're going to do 21% more crit damage. If you got 6 ranks, it's going to be 42% more crit damage. So that's huge. We max out this skill tree, 3 ranks in Permafrost for 15% damage to elites, Hoarfrost for damage to chilled and frozen, Icy Touch for damage to cold damage to vulnerable enemies, and then we take Frigid Breeze. Blizzard doesn't have the best lucky hit, but because Frigid Breeze is working for all damage types right now, like I do believe the Firebolt enchant can proc it, so this thing do be working, and because it's so hungry on mana, we just slotted it. You don't necessarily need to put points in here. You could put them anywhere else you want. If you want more X-Fail procs, you can put them in Precision Magic, so just something to think about. That this is sort of a flex spot. Next, we max out Deep Freeze. Get a barrier when it ends, and it resets all your cooldowns, which is huge. So you can be really aggressive, cast a bunch, teleport, Flame Shield, Frost Nova into a pack, and then you can press your Deep Freeze and like let it kill things, or you can just like double tap it just to pop in and out just to reset your cooldowns so you can keep moving. Then lastly, we take Asu's Ferocity. Even if this gets bug fixed, the Ancient Flame aspect is still going to work with it, because the only condition is that you have to kill an enemy with a critical strike or hit a boss. And you get the bonuses for 3 seconds, which allow you to activate Ancient Flame for the 50% attack speed. But we are getting the... You can just pretend that word, your fire critical strike damage, just says your critical strike damage, and that's how it's working right now. So we're getting some increased crit damage against enemies above half-life, and a little bit of crit chance when they're below half-life. Let's go into a Paragon. This looks really similar to my other Paragon board, but let's just get into it. So I took this all resist here so that I can end up capping and grab some non-fizz, and the reason being is I don't have a stat booster glyph on this starter board. Typically I have reinforced or something here, but because this I'm speccing this build, I'm gearing this towards a bit more damage. So we take exploit for 1.1x damage and some vulnerable damage. Grab this non-fizz, all resist, we path up. Now I do like Elementalist on this build because we're hitting enemies with cold, we got a lightning spear going around, and we have Firebolt enchant, so we have 3 forms of elemental damage that are going to be hitting enemies all the time, so that we're going to have pretty good uptime on the 15%. This boosts our non-fizz and our all resist. Path into my favorite board, Icefall. So frost skills deal 15% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, 30% if they're frozen. Really good node, and this does work with ice spikes. Ice spikes are not so ice spikes are direct damage for Flame Feeder right here. So we get damage to burning, and we get 1.x increased direct damage to burning enemies. So ice spikes is direct damage for Flame Feeder. It counts as a frost skill for Icefall, but for Firebolt enchant, ice spikes do not count as direct damage from skills. Make it make sense. We grab this DR chilled, grab this damage to chilled, some non-fizz, same thing here, damage to chilled, DR chilled, and as I said, Flame Feeder, because everything's burning in the build. I path through to Elemental Summoner, and I take Stalagmite for increased Ice Spike damage, and so my Ice Spikes get 10% crit chance. Very good glyph for Blizzard builds, because the whole damage is Ice Spikes. I like this max mana, it just makes the build a little bit comfier, especially with Ancient Flame. So that gives us 28 mana. Next we path to Destruction. I don't opt for this rare node here because I'm not going to be able to afford the bonus, so the points went elsewhere. But we max out Destruction for 194% critical strike damage, and then we grab this DR from Burning, so that's a nice little pickup. Next, I take Enchanter because honestly I ran out of multis in this build. I ran out of multis, so I use Enchanter as a way to do a multi by giving me non-physical, and then that buffs up my Frigid Fate 8.5%, so it went from 19 to 27% damage to vulnerable enemies. So that's really nice. And we get a bunch of intellect from it. And then lastly, we round it out with control. We just take 32 points, because this doesn't work against bosses until they're staggered, but you get 10% damage to chilled enemies and 20% damage to frozen enemies or stunned. So this has got pretty good uptime. So we're getting a big multi out of this for when we're mobbing, and we're getting some nice additive damage to crowd controlled. All right, I got some runs coming up. We got a T100. I think I got a T100 vault with Ubers on, but this build isn't really that affected by Ubers, honestly. This is probably the build where the only Ubers you're losing is Shako, which is just a quality of life thing. It doesn't really increase damage. So the only thing, if you don't have Ubers, the only thing you're losing is Genesis. So instead of a 50% damage buff, you're getting a 20% damage buff. So this is the least Uber dependent build probably like in the game, well, at least for Sorcerer. So that's really nice. So I do an Uber vault, and then I end up going into, I think, a Nightmare T100 dungeon as well, with no Ubers on whatsoever. And then I clear Uber Lillith with no raiment, no Genesis, no anything, and she just gets absolutely smacked. So thanks for stopping by. I figured I'd make this second one because I've had so many people ask me which is better, Blue Rose or like X-Val builds. So I just made both. They're about the same. They feel really good. But this one does feel a little special because of the Ancient Flame. The cast speed is really crazy on bosses, and like when you're mobbing, it's really good. And thanks to the resource support, we're actually really able to fuel it. So I hope you liked the video. I hope you liked the build. Let me know in the comments what you think about it. Any changes I could make, questions, comments, concerns. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.